This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Coming to us live from some cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin.
That's about right. I have to have a satellite internet connection tonight.
Oh, it's satellite internet. Wow.
Yes.
How did you get satellite internet there?
I rented the cabin. That's what they have. Starlink. It's a satellite.
Oh, yeah, that's Elon's shit, isn't it?
I think so. There's nothing here. We're like 11 miles from Spring Green, which is already in the middle of bumfuck Egypt.
Is it a balmy, 3 degrees?
Oh, no, it's warm.
Up to
up to like 21.
Hey, we're similar temperatures down here.
Yeah, it's going to drop tomorrow again before it starts getting into the high 20s, low 30s over the weekend and 40 by next week. But
this might be something. Do you guys get these weird storms where my work is right in the middle of Atlanta, and south of it got tons of snow. North of Atlanta got none. So half the staff couldn't come. Does that happen in Wisconsin?
Yeah, occasionally. It just depends.
Yeah.
Like really specific hits?
We in north central Wisconsin, in Wausau, we actually have something that qualifies as a mountain in the middle of it. And for whatever reason, it alters the flow of the storm fronts. So you'll get snow that'll happen north of there and south of there, depending on how it hits that mountain. It's goofy.
Regardless, apparently before we could even introduce you, you're already trying to take us off on tangents. But we also welcome our returning celebrity guest, co-host of the War Starts at Midnight podcast, and one of the newest members of the Five Timers Club. That's right, it's Peterson W. Hill.
Excited to be back after a little Christmas sabbatical here, and oldest movie I've discussed now.
Do we get a hat sighting?
It is in my car, and it's too cold for me to walk outside at the moment. I promise that.
Okay, what is too cold?
It is currently 19 degrees.
Ooh,
I
wow.
literally went in 15 degree weather that's supposed to feel like 2 degrees in shorts, like 20 minutes ago.
I'm running around like this. I have a nylon shirt and a vest. And this is how I went around town today getting down here because it was so warm.
There was people ice skating on the road last night in prominent roads in Atlanta.
I can believe that. You guys shut down for very little.
Because we're not set up for this.
Then again, I saw a video of Destin, Florida, where the entire beach was white with snow. I mean, they got to be freaking the fuck out. One
of my co-hosts on War Starts at Midnight, we were talking yesterday. I was like, God, did you guys get anything? And he lives in Baton Rouge. It is the largest snowfall since 1896.
95. That was the
95.
8.25 inches. They had 7 inches yesterday.
Yeah, and then before this, it was 1946 or 56, one of the two. And it's more snow than I've seen here.
Well, before we lose the entire audience by discussing something that's topical only this week, let's talk about tonight's movie. Tonight, for our 246th episode, we discuss The Shop Around the Corner from 1940, celebrating its 85th anniversary, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, written by Samson Raphaelson and Ben Hecht, music by Werner Heyman, starring Margaret Sullavan as Klara Novak, James Stewart as Alfred Kralik, Frank Morgan as Hugo Matacek, Joseph Schildkraut as Ferenc Vadash, Sarah Hayden as Flora Kosick, I think that's right, Felix Bressart as Pirovich, William Tracy as Pepe Katona, and Inez Courtney as Ilona Novotny. Recognition for this movie: The Shop Around the Corner was released on January 12th, 1940. Based on the 1937 Hungarian play Parfumerie by Miklos Laszlo, the film is said to have had near-universal praise at the time of its release. In subsequent years, The Shop Around the Corner has ranked number 28 on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Passions, and is listed in Time's all-time 100 movies. In 1999, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. The Shop Around the Corner ranked 202nd in the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound Critics Poll of the Greatest Films Ever Made, having garnered 8 critics' votes. The film was also 58th in BBC's 2015 poll of the best American films. The film has also had several remakes, including a musical, In the Good Old Summertime from 1949, starring Judy Garland and Van Johnson, the 1963 Broadway musical She Loves Me, and the 1998 film reimagining by Nora Ephron, You've Got Mail, with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. The Shop Around the Corner holds a 99% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 96 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
None. Had never seen it, had barely heard of it. I knew only of it from, of all things, a book on Henry Fonda and James Stewart you gave me for Christmas about 4 or 5 years ago. And in fact, well, the three of them, it was kind of almost a mini love triangle between Margaret Sullavan, Henry Fonda, and James Stewart. And that's how I knew about the film. Otherwise, I would not have known about it at all. They were in a troupe in Los Angeles, an acting company, and ultimately they were all friends. And Fonda and Sullivan ended up married. They ended up later divorced, but they ended up being lifelong friends and were in and out of each other's lives whenever either of them was in despair or trouble.
My relationship to this is similar to yours. This is the first time I've watched it. I think I only became familiar with it existing within the last maybe year or so. And I really started to see it pop up around Christmas as like this Christmas favorite on film Twitter and some other social media places. So I wasn't very familiar with the film. However, I said in a group chat that I have with Andrew and Sarah Shea that upon watching this and recognizing all of the familiar beats, yes, I watched The Shop Around the Corner the first time and I was enthralled. And then I went and rewatched You've Got Mail for like the 45th time and was also enthralled because I'm not going to watch that movie when I have an opportunity because 90s rom-coms is where it's at. So Peterson, how about you?
So I watched this for the first time probably about 10 years ago. I knew it was at least tangentially related to Christmas. My wife and I are like, hey, let's watch an old classic Christmas movie. And we've watched it once or twice since and then just rewatching it for this. This is probably the fourth, maybe fifth time I've seen it. Unlike you, I think I've seen parts of You've Got Mail a million times, but I don't know if I've ever sat down and watched You've Got Mail from start to finish. And that's just from TBS reruns growing up. Because that's a 99 movie?
1998.
98?
Yeah.
So that was a TBS just staple, TNT staple. Saw it 5-10 minutes here and there. You know, Nora Ephron directs one of my favorite romantic comedies in Sleepless in Seattle. I think that's like a perfect film. And Shop Around the Corner, I think, is just a wonderful movie. And outside of You've Got Mail, I think, and we can talk about this later, but I think this is a blueprint for so many romantic comedies.
Well, that's because it's almost entirely, and the subsequent remake, You've Got Mail, makes it pretty obvious. This is basically just Pride and Prejudice redone.
Yeah, the idea that you're going to keep these people away from each other. Like, we know they should be together because they're intimately connected, but they have no idea. I guess Kralik knows for most of the movie, but she's just completely in the dark. So even something like, I don't know, Definitely Maybe from like 2008, which I love that movie. You know, I thought about that movie a lot where it's like, oh, which person's he going to end up with? It's like, it's very obvious to know who's going to end up with. But the whole thing is seeing how they get there. And I think Kralik has some poor decisions in this movie where you're like, buddy, you're making this really difficult on yourself.
Yeah, both people are rather impulsive and prideful and kind of make things extra difficult on themselves throughout the course of the movie. I mean, she's rather temperamental throughout the whole thing and also incredibly impulsive, but apparently that was barely acting for Margaret Sullavan.
Yes.
But I mean, that does make for the stuff of romantic comedies. And would I say that by extension, this is the exact blueprint for a lot of them? No. I mean, it is amazing how many different things from You've Got Mail that I've watched, like I said, like 40 some times at this point, are directly ripped from this movie. Like, you watch them back to back and you're like, oh my God, they just basically ripped off the scene almost line for line. They just updated the thing to a modern coffee shop instead of dunking your cake. It's, any number of things, but they ripped off direct lines from that. But like, similarly, this is how a lot of these kind of romantic comedies of the era were. Like, if you start bringing up Baby or His Girl Friday, there's always something where they're just like, they don't quite fit together, but they're supposed to end up together and they somehow do. And, so it's kind of got this screwball nature to it.
Well, I think what's important about this one too is that so much of the movie is about all of the other characters and how they exist with those other characters. And then it's like the last 20 minutes focuses on the two of them. I think so much of it is about all the external characters in the relationship. And I think because of that, if those people were boring, I think it'd be a bad movie. But I think all the other characters are so interesting that makes this movie, I think, really zippy and delightful. It's an easy 1 hour 40.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And that'll obviously come up in rewatchability later on. But I was surprised. It was a little slow for me at the beginning, but I surprised myself with how much I thought I enjoyed it. Like, once it really got going, I felt it had a lot of momentum behind it and could really get into the movies.
I think it does take a minute to kind of get on its wavelength a little bit, especially that first watch, because you're like, what exactly am I following here?
Yeah. So what is the movie about?
It's the romanticism of love versus how love really is, which is with all kinds of warts and bad hair in the morning and the morning breath and all of that stuff that comes with a relationship.
I think one of the tenets that I would gravitate towards here, one of the things that they're able to reveal because it's anonymous is some of their true selves. And you have somebody responding, but obviously the person they project on a daily basis is entirely different from who they actually are or who they could be. But they don't feel like they can let that person out because of the nature of who they're interacting with on a daily basis. I think for the most part, and I know I feel this personally, I don't think there's a person in my life who knows me completely. Not more than maybe 85%. And I think the closest person is my dad. There is nobody else that really understands me that innately because I just don't let certain portions of myself out for judgment of others or any number of reasons, the fear of being rejected. And so, especially in a love context, we have these walls that we create for ourselves. And obviously the two leads in this movie create these walls just through their interactions. But when they have the time to sit down and carefully word something and show that they're interested in more than what their day-to-day lives are, I think that's where this actually has some fundamental meaning. And it's shared, or at least is repeated. If you've watched You've Got Mail, it's got a lot of the same things underneath. But if we were to do like a 2024 version, it's no longer You Got Mail because that just doesn't age well in an age without AOL. And honestly, this will come up in Classicness too. But does anybody out there under the age of like 40 know what a letter is anymore? So it's not going to be email. It's not going to be letters. It's going to be like two people found each other anonymously on a Reddit feed.
Well, I know it's amazing how you really don't allow your true self to come out because, for example, if I really were to talk about my inner feelings, I like to skip and jump and press wildflowers.
What? Going back to last week's film, Dad, are you having some latent feelings?
Well, no, I'm in the middle of the woods, so I was thinking about being a lumberjack.
And you'll be okay.
But Tom, I didn't realize we were re-reviewing Gone Girl so early.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, that's what that movie's entirely about, is the portions and the pieces of your life that you're willing to show somebody. And then because you're around somebody so much, other pieces start to sneak in. And maybe the pieces of, Kralik in this movie, she doesn't like at first because he's brash. Then she realizes she really doesn't like him because he is that sensitive poet, that sensitive soul. I think at the beginning of the story, I think it's very important when she talks about when she was at the Brothers and Sons. She has that great quote where she's like, it's one way or the other, but it's like, oh, the brothers were okay, but the sons, oof, they're bad. Which implies there was some kind of misogyny going on in a way. And she appreciated with Kralik, he was this very upstanding gentleman. When he wanted to go and, put suitcases up, it was, we're going to put suitcases up. And she appreciated that about him.
I mean, did misogyny even exist in 1940?
It was called life.
She left on her own accord. So she makes a really conscious choice to leave. And so when she joins Matichak and Company, she really likes that Kralik is respectful and kind. And then, he's also Jimmy Stewart. He's a charming man.
Just not classically attractive.
No, he's not classically attractive, but he's got a certain handsome, like he is handsome.
Yeah.
But he is goofy looking at the same time.
No more than anybody else in 1940.
Yeah, that might be true. But I think part of what I'm alluding to here is that it's very much about not being able to see what's in front of you and not being able to kind of register, oh, maybe I do really like this person or love this person or feel attached to them. Because whether it's proximity or you have this external force, which is these letters of somebody you've actually never met or seen. Because as soon as he starts talking about, was it Popovic, I think, or Popkin? As soon as he starts talking about Popkin and having the pot belly and all this, she checks out immediately. She's like, I want him to look like you, a tall, strapping man.
So I know we've kind of talked about other movies, obviously, one in particular, but why do you think the movie has been readapted so many times over the decades?
If you've got a comment, Peters, go ahead, because I think it's pretty obvious.
I think it's really obvious. It's just perfect blueprint for getting two people together, and it creates an automatic tension without making it adversarial, if that makes sense. There's tension of will they, won't they? Obviously they will, because it's Hollywood. But it makes it difficult, something like The Holiday, that movie, it's this movie, except it's the two women, because they switch houses, and it's like they don't talk the entire movie. It's like you rework this concept to a million different ways, and it's effective. And one thing that I think is also really nice about this movie, partly why You've Got Mail has really specific jobs for them, is that seeing them actually at their job as shopkeepers. People in movies aren't shopkeepers. People in movies are architects and magazine editors, jobs that very few people have. So when you see somebody actually in a work environment that is very common, and they're and Kralik seems to be very good at it, and she seems to be pretty good at it as well. I think that also kind of lends to some credence of the movie in reality.
So, Dad, you want to give everybody some additional background on this? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
The Shop Around the Corner is a charming romantic comedy set at a Budapest gift shop. The story revolves around the antagonistic relationship between the store's manager, Alfred Kralik, James Stewart, and his co-worker, Klara Novak, Margaret Sullavan. Unbeknownst to each other, they are anonymous pen pals who have fallen in love through their letter exchanges. When they finally meet in person, their identities come to light, leading to a delightful resolution filled with warmth and humor. It's a delightful tale of mistaken identities, charming misunderstandings, and the magic of love letters.
Thank you. Did you know? In the book, Ernst Lubitsch, Laughter in Paradise, Lubitsch recalled this film as the best picture I ever made in my life. Additionally, The Shop Around the Corner is the most meaningful tribute possible to the owner and employees of the long-vanished Berlin clothing firm of S. Lubitsch. Did you know? James Stewart and Margaret Sullavan had known each other for a long time before making this film. Both were in a summer stock company called the University Players. It was there that Stewart realized his potential as an actor, so he followed Sullavan and fellow player Henry Fonda to New York to begin an acting career in earnest. Did you know? Even though Margaret Sullavan was infamous for her quick temper and disdainful attitude towards Hollywood, James Stewart counted working with her as one of the great joys of his professional career. And because he knew her personally, he was more equipped than most of the cast and crew members to deal with her frequent and volatile emotional outbursts. Did you know? Originally, Janet Gaynor was the likely candidate for the role of Klara, as she was under contract to MGM at the time. Then, European actress Dolly Haas was penciled in for the female lead, but Ernst Lubitsch had second thoughts about casting an unknown actress for American audiences. Did you know? This movie starred 2 Oscar winners and 2 Oscar nominees. Can you name them?
Well, yeah, Frank Morgan and Jimmy Stewart both had won.
James Stewart won, yes. And you said Frank Morgan won an Oscar? That is incorrect.
He only was nominated?
Correct.
Yes.
Best actor for The Affairs of Cellini and Best Supporting for Tortilla Flat, a movie I did not end up watching for the 1942 episode of the Revisionist Almanac that nobody listened to anyway, so I don't really feel that badly.
It's Joseph Schildkraut, then, isn't it? I don't know.
Joseph Schildkraut won for The Life of Emile Zola for Best Supporting in 1937. I believe he was also nominated for The Diary of Anne Frank, and Margaret Sullavan was the other nominee. She was nominated for 1938's Three Comrades. So, all right. With that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back.
Are the movies that win Best Picture at the Oscars actually worthy of being called the greatest movies of all time? I'm Andrew from the Revisionist Almanac, and my podcast looks to answer just that question. The show is a monthly interactive experience where I dive into a past year with a rotating group of guests to look at what won Oscars for picture, director, and acting. We revise those winners and then let the actual winners battle out our revised picks in online polls where you, the listener, get to have your voice heard. So come check out the show on all podcast streaming platforms and find the show on every social media platform using the handle RevAlmanac. I can't wait to see you there.
Before we jump back into the episode, next week we welcome back returning guest Peterson W. Hill of the War Starts at Midnight podcast to discuss La Dolce Vita from 1960, written and directed by Federico Fellini, with Ennio Flanaio, Tullio Pinelli, Brunello Rondi, and Pier Paolo Pasolini. Music by Nino Rota, starring Marcello Mastroianni, Anita Ekberg and Anouk Ami, and Yvonne Furneaux. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's ReelGood.
Yeah,
you got Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Your Italian is
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you have that to look forward to next week, people. But before we get back into the other portion of the show, Peterson, what are you working on and where can people find you?
As of right now, I'm working on very little because I thought the fall was busy. Spring is insanely busy with kids. But I do have some things that I'd like to get done around March with Psycho Drive-In, and then we're always talking about revving back up at War Starts at Midnight. So, yeah, we're always throwing out miniseries names to each other about what we could do. You know, like Martin Brest, like the Breast Men.
I don't think that will have a high classicness score.
Or the Breast Exam.
Sure.
Hopefully soon going to pick up more, but Man, kids keep you busy in the spring. It's
Wouldn't
insane.
know.
Whew. We are in competition dance this weekend. We're having to travel to Macon for theater festival in like 2 weeks. It's nuts.
Is that far?
We're like 75, 80 minutes from Macon, so not far, but we'll get a hotel room because the call times are like 6:30 in the morning. So I'm not a morning person per se.
Really? That gruff exterior is not a morning person?
which is crazy because I do get to work at like 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Have 9 cups of coffee and tackle the day. I highly recommend watching Kieran Culkin's discussion of how with Coleman Domingo of how he gets up in the morning. I
do remember that.
It is hysterical.
All right. So before we get too much further and without a ton of extra ado, we're going to start a new monthly segment, the GMOAT Hall of Fame. So the rules are very simple on this one. A movie that you were in or a part of, you have to have been credited in the movie. So uncredited roles do not count, such as Will Ferrell in Wedding Crashers, even though I think that was like the most charismatic for multiple of us in that discussion. But you have to have been credited in some capacity on the film, producer, director, etc., composer for some, and it has to be unanimously accepted by Dana and I. So the first 3 that I have to put into the Hall of Fame here, the first one we will take with for tonight. We have James Stewart. He has appeared in 5 different movies over the course of the show. I don't have them all immediately right in front of me. I think it's Philadelphia Story, Vertigo, Rear Window,
It's a Wonderful Life.
The Man Who Knew Too Much, It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah, there's several James Stewart films. We've done Mr. Smith Goes to Washington so far. So, yeah, there's at least 5 for him. He goes up for nomination here, which obviously, since I'm doing the nominations, I approve of, so I'll just have to get a yes or no, up or down from my co-host here in a second. My second nomination, we have discussed his films at least 9 times on the show, and I think for 7 different films so far. We have him coming up quite a number of times again this season, including the second of our revisits series, if you will, with Jaws. We have Steven Spielberg for consideration. And then third, we will also induct, or I will nominate, a composer this evening, and that would be John Williams, which I think we've covered at least 6, if not 7 of his films. So, Dad, yes or no on James Stewart? Yes, in an audio medium, giving a thumbs up is just great. It's like nodding yes to a blind guy.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. And for Steven Spielberg, yes or no?
Yes.
And finally, yes or no to John Williams?
Well, I'm not sure. I was hoping for a better reaction from you than that. Yes.
Okay. So we have 3 GMOAT Hall of Famers so far on the show. We will be doing this segment monthly. You can send in your suggestions. If you need to look at the full list of all the films that we've covered, you can find any of that on the website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOAT podcast. The easiest place is going to be the greatest movie of all time total list that has all 221 different films that we've graded. But you can obviously look through the selection of the archive of different ones. We have them going back to the original episode of Raiders of the Lost Ark from episode 1, February 25th, I think, 26th of 2020. So you can definitely go and find different selections and figure out who we have covered at least 5 times as a director, composer, cinematographer, etc. And send in those suggestions for consideration next month. So that to look forward to. All right, let's get back to the movie of the evening, The Shop Around the Corner. We left off at Best Performance. Dad, who did you have down?
I have Ernest Lubitsch. It's a very tightly directed movie. I mean, it's quick-paced. It doesn't, I mean, it's a little slow at the beginning, but it packs a big punch in a very short period of time. And that's primarily the directing. of getting all the supporting cast moving in the same direction.
It does have a intangible quality to it that you kind of have to have for most rom-coms. I think in some ways it's carried by its leads a little bit, even though I think that the supporting cast is decent. You're still taking mostly the backbones of the original play and kind of converting it. And you can kind of feel that, especially in the opening scene where it's just very introductory. Everybody's hanging out on the street, but there's just kind of this crowd of people off on one corner, and it feels very theater-esque in especially the limited settings during the course of the film. I didn't end up nominating him for anything. I had James Stewart myself. Like I said, I think the film is in most part carried by its leads. Whether they're acting or not is kind of uncertain, because James Stewart is kind of this guy in a lot of films, especially kind of romantic lead films. But especially with what we have said previously and was in the Did You Know section, Margaret Sullavan also doesn't seem like she's acting. She's kind of gotten a fiery personality that's very quick talking and very reminiscent of this era of kind of screwball comedies, romantic comedies, if you will. And so I would say that between the two of them, they carry the majority of the movie because most of the interactions has to do with them. I want to say Jimmy Stewart is in just about every scene, and the scenes he's not, Margaret Sullavan is basically in, save for the one section in the hospital, basically, or anything that's involving the errand boy turned clerk.
But that's like a minute, because he's still in the scene. It's just he exits a little early, or he comes in. I think he comes in and exits both a little bit early and late.
But it's not like a total amount of time. I would say it's maybe 5 minutes where it's not involving one of them directly. Whether you want to talk about Frank Morgan inviting the new errand boy over to his house for Christmas, I guess that's one of the other few small areas, but it really is on the back of its 2 stars. And frankly, it should be. The whole film, the play, etc., is kind of about this relationship between the two of them.
So I'm going to diverge from both of you guys and say my best performance is Frank Morgan. I absolutely love him in this movie. I think he is fantastic. While Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullavan absolutely are the leads, I don't think this movie has nearly the staying power if you don't have the Frank Morgan character. He brings a rich, layered kind of humanity to his role. And I do that ending scene where he's talking to the errand boy, I think is so sweet. It's so impactful. And you can see just how much having these people in his employ means to him. So I think Frank Morgan really is just absolutely wonderful in this movie. Every scene, every phrase, it's just beautiful, beautiful performance.
I know that it's supposed to be endearing. I guess I just didn't quite get that out of that role for whatever reason. It seems like he's more of the comedic foil than he is to be potentially endearing, but I don't know. Maybe it just, for whatever reason, rubbed me the wrong way.
I think he does start there. And because of, what happens at the midpoint with him realizing that his wife's having an affair with one of his shop clerks, he has a complete recalibration of his life and realizes what's really important to him. And he does say, I think the moment where he says, I spent my entire life here, so much of my life in this building. And he realizes just how much everything in that shop means to him. And I think this is one of the aspects of the movie that we haven't really talked about, but how the relationship between him and Kralik, or him and Jimmy Stewart, is one of the big emotional catharsises of the movie, where they do genuinely get to the point where they respect each other and care about each other. But it's still a little bit prickly, but he's just a prickly guy. And this is also, I think it's really important to remember, this specific telling is probably filmed in 38, maybe 39. So the Great Depression's still ravaging the world.
As far as best secondary performance, I have the writers on this one, Raphaelson and Hecht. I think you would probably also give a rather large assist to the original playwright being Miklos Laszlo, I believe. I just think this is really, it's a tight film because it is based on the play. I don't think that they make it overly complicated or over long. I think it's got some good messaging to it, some very good themes, and they keep you involved in the characters without losing you really at any point. So I think for me, the writing is going to have to be front and central a little bit more than maybe the direction.
For me, the best secondary performance was James Stewart. Stewart had an ability to play the romantic, the hurt employee, rising above the flames manager. There just was a lot to his character and his performance that was layered that I thought he did an overall excellent job doing.
Jimmy Stewart is also my secondary. Jimmy Stewart's one of my favorite actors. I think doing work that nobody else of his generation's really doing for a few years. And this still is probably not even going to make the top 10 of my favorite Jimmy Stewart performances.
You mean GMOAT Hall of Famer Jimmy Stewart?
GMOAT Hall of Famer on the wall.
Got to get him like a gold jacket for that.
Good luck getting him to wear it.
That's true. Most charismatic, I have Felix Bressart as Pirovich. I think he's a really great side character, and you kind of need in one of these films the best friend or the person that you talk to the most, that you're bouncing constant ideas off of, and that is somewhat of a comedic foil to be a good, endearing character who kind of is slightly comedic, but not so much that it's off-putting. It's not too goofy. And so there's kind of a fine line between that. But I think he strikes that really well, where he kind of feels wise as an older man. He's got his life put together. He can give advice, but yet he never really feels like he's going to step over the line of being the good friend. And so I think from a standpoint of this is kind of like one of the coworkers you'd like to have yourself, I think he's one of the more charismatic people in the film.
But I think that's also why you have Dave Chappelle as Tom Hanks' friend. You've got Mail. Just strange casting, having Dave Chappelle and Tom Hanks be best buddies.
It works, though.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it doesn't work. It's just,
yes,
it makes sense. In '98, Chappelle's kind of on the rise. It's like, let's get him in a movie. Let's,
in context, Dave Chappelle now compared to Dave Chappelle in 1998. Yeah, it makes more sense. Let's have him be modern and have a black best friend who's like
20 years,
yeah,
20 years younger.
But okay, now in context, that role probably should have gone to Morris Chestnut or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Taye Diggs. I don't know what Taye Diggs was doing in 1998, but
probably
Omar Epps.
Baby boy.
Omar Epps would have been perfect.
The Rock.
Lawrence Fishburne. I think The Rock was still playing football at Miami in 1998.
Could you imagine Dwayne The Rock Johnson, the best friend of Tom Hanks, and You've Got Mail?
I could barely imagine Dwayne The Rock Johnson being the best friend of Chris Evans in half of these movies for Netflix or whatever.
I think it'd almost be like the moment where you have LeBron James being the best friend of Bill Hader in Trainwreck.
Yeah.
And it's
just ridiculous.
Yeah. But so that leads me into my final, which is most charismatic word to me goes to Samson Raffleson and Ben Hecht. I think the screenplay here is just truly wonderful. An excellent screenplay.
My most charismatic was Margaret Sullavan. Fiery, quick-witted. She had an ability to take over the screen when she was in it. Although I was debating between her and Frank Morgan, and my favorite Frank Morgan story is that Frank Morgan always carried a briefcase, and everybody always thought it was his scripts. He carried a full bar.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. Novak's job hunt, so basically the first scene with the music box, and you know how it ends. Then I have Matichek dismisses Kralik. I have Red Carnations, which is supposed to signify the meeting between the two where he knows it's her, but she doesn't know it's him. Then I have Vadish dismissed. And I have finally the final scene, Kralik's reveal to Klara. Now, I missed several, especially in the second half, specific scenes. But are there any others that you think I should include?
Yeah, the one that is not in there for me is the moment where Frank Morgan on Christmas Eve comes in, basically finished the Christmas Eve shopping, and he gives his speech where he just tells everyone how much it means to them. He gives their Christmas bonuses. And I think that's just a really sweet and, to me, really endearing scene. I know you couldn't get there, Tom, but I think that to me is just a really wonderful moment that really, I think, pushes this film into something that another romantic comedy wouldn't necessarily be.
Okay. Then, best scene. Out of these 6, Novak's job hunt, Matichek dismisses Kralik, Red Carnations, Vadish dismissed, Matichek comes back to work, and Kralik comes out. What is the best scene?
For me, it's the Red Carnations. It's the most iconic scene in the film. It is a scene that's been recreated in probably dozens, if not hundreds of films, or at least to some extent. It's the, I know something she doesn't know, and I'm going to play it up aspect of it. I think it's by far the best scene.
For me, as much as I enjoyed Red Carnations, and it's my favorite scene and most indelible moment, I still think that the Matichek dismissing Kralik scene is a little bit more weighty as far as the emotional heft of the movie. It kind of feels like it's coming out of nowhere, and you're kind of questioning it, because why would this happen to the lead character of Jimmy Stewart? Even in 1940, where he'd already been the star in several movies. Nothing bad is supposed to happen to Jimmy Stewart in a comedy. So for him to get fired kind of unceremoniously, you're like, what the fuck's going on? So because of that, I have that as the best scene.
And Tom, one thing you didn't mention, but I love about that scene is that when Matichek is dismissing him, he starts it by saying, I think he would be happier somewhere else. Like he is, it is hard for Matichek to let go of him. And he has to basically hide behind being like, I'm doing this for you. Like I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you because you'd be better somewhere else. Obviously he's doing it for himself, but I think that's one of the reasons that scene hits hard as well, because both men are really kind of torn about the moment. Personally, my favorite is with Dana. I love the Red Carnation scene. And this is where I think Lubitsch is so good at. It does feel a little bit like a stage play filmed, but the blocking is fantastic. Where you have Jimmy Stewart just dancing between these two tables, and he's sitting down, and she's like, no, you can't sit. And then he's got to go to the other table, and then he's like leaning back, and he's like talking to her, and then she's getting upset because she's like, well, no, he's gonna see. I think that scene is just like, I think the most well directed and probably performed scene from the two of them, at least in the film.
Favorite scenes for either of you?
For me, the favorite scene is Kralik comes out. I just think it's sweet, it's funny, it's tender, it's what the whole film leads up to. It's the heart of a rom-com.
It's hard to argue with that. I do appreciate that scene a lot. The only thing that holds me back on that scene is that I'm like, Kralik, dude, come on. You just spill the beans now. Like, he keeps just like pushing things. He's like, oh, he's a tubby guy and he's balding and all this. It's like, just come out. Like, I think he prolongs it a little bit too long, in my opinion. I still like the scene, but I just think it'd be a little bit more effective if he comes out quicker. My favorite scene is Matichek on Christmas Eve. I think that's just, I love that scene. That scene does in some way remind me a little bit of another Jimmy Stewart classic of It's a Wonderful Life. Not as good as that. I mean, that's about as good as movies get. So I think it is in that same conversation of somebody realizing kind of the importance of their life and their work on other people.
I'd like the ending scene a little bit more if it had "Don't cry, shop girl." But that's just me. What? It's a great way to end that movie.
Also, why did she think he was bow-legged?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not even really sure that that's a thing anymore, but whatever. Most indelible moment for either of you. I had the red carnations, but...
Me also.
Me as well.
Okay. Any particular reason or anything else we felt we haven't touched with that scene?
I just think it's the scene that stands the test of what is now 85 years of distance. I think it just stands out really, really well. And it's one that has been copied and redone so many times. I think it's the most iconic scene of the film.
I think it's the definite pivot point where we have everything leading up to that being almost the peak of the movie, and then everything is kind of downhill after that. Not necessarily in like the quality of the film, but rather in just simple plot momentum. We've reached this high point where we've kind of distanced our two characters just enough that we have enough space for them to come back together in such a great way. And so that's why I think having it in the middle like that is actually a great piece of writing more than anything else.
When I watch that scene, it reminds me in some way of the other Nora Ephron movie I talked about earlier, which was Sleeps in Seattle, where Tom Hanks is the first time he's on the phone and talking about his dead wife. And it's like that to me is the turning point of that movie where you're like, oh, he just like unloads all this information. And I think it's similar to the way Jimmy Stewart is in that scene. I'm sure Nora Ephron took inspiration from this movie in that as well. Because that's another weird, estranged love story across, vast distances.
So that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back.
Hey, movie lovers, this is Kyle, host and producer of the Movie Wars podcast. We're not just a movie review podcast. There's plenty of those. On Movie Wars, a panel of stand-up comedians blends humor with deep film analysis using their unique war card system to grade movies across key categories. Each episode delivers thoughtful insights and spirited debate, offering a fresh comedic take on film analysis. New episodes drop every Thursday on all podcasting platforms and YouTube. Deeply researched, gut-wrenchingly funny, you'll love Movie Wars.
Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our master greatest movies of all time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOAT podcast and find it as the top entry on the greatest movie of all time podcast show page. That is the grades we've done so far for all 221 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Unfortunately, we have a long list. Dame Joan Plowright, 95, English actress. Enchanted April, I Love You to Death, Stalin, and Avalon. Garth Hudson, 87, Canadian Hall of Fame musician. In the group The Band, and keyboardist, known for the song Chest Fever. Joyce Piven, 94, American theater teacher, actress, and director. Toby Myers, 75, American musician, bassist for Roadmaster, John Cougar Mellencamp. Francisco San Martin, 39, American actor, Days of Our Lives, The Bold and the Beautiful, and Jane the Virgin. Melba Montgomery, 86, American country singer, No Charge, Don't Let the Good Times Fool You, Angel of the Morning, and songwriter. David Ducklin, 74, American television writer and producer, creator of Punky Brewster, producer of Silver Spoons and Family Matters. David Lynch, 78, American filmmaker, Twin Peaks, Blue Velvet, and Mulholland Drive. And then lastly, a more personal note, Bob Uecker, 90, American athlete, actor, broadcaster. In the film Major League, was in the TV show Mr. Belvedere, was the voice of the Milwaukee Brewers since 1971. Affectionately known as Mr. Baseball, a deep personal loss to me. Yet another piece of my childhood is ended.
I, too, am obviously touched by the loss of Bob Uecker. I know it means a little bit more for you, who's been a fan of the Milwaukee Brewers since 1970, but he's been the broadcaster since 1971. So there's almost no Brewer game that has gone without his voice for decades at this point. And he's just so synonymous with summer ball games on the radio and great stories. And everybody seemed to have a great Uecker story, seemed to love him. He had apparently this magical touch with people, both as a humorist and just a fun person to be around. And while he was definitely older, he was 90, I believe, there was always this gnawing thing as a Brewers fan in the back of your mind. How much longer are we going to have Bob? And he'd been slowing down for a couple of years, but none of us, except a few select players and coaches, even knew he was really sick and that last year was his real swan song. So I'll admit to definitely having some tears shed watching all the memorials and tributes to him online the day that it happened. And it's one of those few uniting moments as a Wisconsin sports fan that you're going to have. Not many people age gracefully. Bob Uecker aged wonderfully. As far as David Lynch, obviously, as a program, we have yet to cover any of his films. He is a director that I've been told is particularly challenging. And so it's not something that has come up yet. I'm sure at some point during the course of the show it will. I think at one point we're covering Blue Velvet. I can't remember.
I don't see him being one of your guys, Tom.
It's possible.
If I was going to guess.
But even so, and I know full well that not really having watched any of his films, never watching Twin Peaks, that I am not the right person to really eulogize him for in this program. So we have a submission to help us appreciate him from one Mr. Andrew Corns, who will do him a better justice than I ever could. While George Lucas was changing what we knew of cinematic blockbusters with Star Wars in 1977, another filmmaker was arriving on the scene to shake up the art form in his own unique way with Eraserhead. David Lynch was an artist who spent 5 decades making uncompromising, one-of-a-kind works that are still being discovered today by young cinephiles. He left an impression on the landscape of film and television that fundamentally shifted the world as we see it. Though his passing brings sadness and pain to those that loved him, his legacy is unmatched and he will remain immortal in what he gave throughout his life. The one solitary moment I have with David Lynch is him playing John Ford in The Fabelmans. And if that's all I have to go on, goddamn, was that a good scene.
The last lines he will ever say in a movie are "my pleasure," which is, Lynch is one of those people that I wouldn't necessarily say he's one of my top directors personally. I always respected him. I still think Mulholland Drive is an incredible piece of work. Things like Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, I think are quite good. Straight Stories, wonderful. But he is a challenging director in a lot of ways. And I think what's important, why I think it's really meaningful to me that you guys do this in Memoriam segment is that somebody like David Lynch comes along who's not necessarily a director that really connected with me. Like, when Spielberg passes, I know I'm just going to be just devastated. Scorsese, same thing. I didn't necessarily have the connection to Lynch, and learning of him passing really affected me, and it made me appreciate his work in a way that I hadn't really thought about. And I think the thing that I'm connected with Lynch most is he has these very dark views of humanity, but he also is just this very aw shucks guy off screen. You can watch, I'll send it to you, Tom. David Lynch watching the end of It's a Wonderful Life. And he's got tears in his eyes and just bowls him over emotionally. And you're like, this is the guy who's made some of the most twisted images in the history of the medium. But he's sitting here weeping over Jimmy Stewart, saying like, attaboy Clarence. And it's just, everyone who ever worked with him just says he's such a mensch. He was the sweetest man, the nicest guy. We thank the career of Naomi Watts to him, basically. So I think that's one thing I love about doing the Memoriam is that it makes you, unfortunately, sometimes too late, remember the people you really love, or like why these are such totemic figures in this medium.
I happened to see an interview, a in memoriam interview with Mel Brooks about
who produced
David
The Elephant
Lynch.
Man.
Mel Brooks's theater company or production company did The Elephant Man.
Yeah.
Which they ended up hiring Lynch to direct. And he talks about meeting him as a 24-year-old director coming onto the scene and having to convince Mel Brooks that he was capable of doing this film. And listening to Brooks talk about him with such envy and passion as to what he was and as both a director and an artist was quite touching.
And so we honor these here with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. All right, let's move to best funniest lines. First one up that I have, Hugo Matichek. Well, what do you say now? Alfred Kralik. I think people who like to smoke candy and listen to cigarettes will love it.
Alfred Kralik. But I have troubles of my own without your blouse coming between Mr. Matichek and me.
Kralik. Well, that's very nicely put. Yes, comparing my intellect with a cigarette lighter that doesn't work. That's a very interesting mixture of poetry and meanness.
You forewent the previous or the preceding lines. Kralik, there might be a lot we don't know about each other. People seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth. Novak, well, I really wouldn't care to scratch your surface, Mr. Kralik, because I know exactly what I'd find. Instead of a heart, a handbag. Instead of a soul, a suitcase. And instead of an intellect, a cigarette lighter, which doesn't work.
Alfred Kralik. Now, if I were a girl and had to choose between a young good-for-nothing with plenty of hair and a good, solid, mature citizen, I'd pick Matthias Popkin every time.
I'm out.
Already?
Yeah, there aren't. To me, there aren't a lot of great. There's great sets of lines, but not a great particular line.
Okay.
I've got one more.
I've got a couple, but Kralik, Pirovich, did you ever get a bonus? Pirovich, yes, once. Kralik, yeah, the boss hands you the envelope. You wonder how much is in it, and you don't want to open it. As long as the envelope's closed, you're a millionaire.
Alfred Kralik. Well, after a while, we got on the subject of love, naturally, on a very cultural level. Pirovich. Well, what else can you do in a letter?
Hugo Matichek. Don't let me influence you. I want your opinion. Your honest opinion. Okay. Let's move to the Stanley rubric then. Legacy is up first. This is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it was released, so 1945 to now. What is the legacy of the film? We split this category 5 and 5, with 5 points going to the industry and 5 points to the general audience. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. This is a fascinating dichotomy to me. The legacy for the industry I have as a 4.5 because it has become highly esteemed among critics or cinephiles. It has been copied and repeated and followed and redone and remodeled and reused. Yet, by the same token, the general public is not familiar with the film, doesn't see it very often, and is not aware that this film really exists. So I have to go with a 1.5 for the public. So I am at a 7 overall.
You want to redo
6.
your math there?
6, excuse me.
I was going to say your numbers don't add up, but anyway.
Yep.
I'll be at the 7 though, because I have a 4 for the industry and I have a 3 for the audience. My 4 comes from the fact that I think this is close, but it's not quite on this like cusp of greatest all-time films. I think it has some notoriety. The fact that it's been remade gives it some extra juice, but it's not like one of these that's in almost every critic included list. It's on some very good ones, but it's not quite on the level of some others that I would probably put ahead of it, even at like a 4.5 level, where we're not talking like the greatest films of all time, the Godfathers, the In the Mood for Love, your 2001s, your Vertigos, etc. We're talking more the middle brow films that are a little bit more in the center. I would guess something like a Raiders of the Lost Ark is closer to being in that kind of like middle section of films for some people. But I have that at a 4. On the 3 for the audience, just because you and I had not necessarily heard of this and really hadn't ever seen it, doesn't mean it's not a film that resonates and is more popular among the general public. Apparently, this has been a Christmas favorite for a while. Just because we've only recently been exposed to it does not mean that our experience necessarily is everyone's experience. And I think that this is more popular, if not a little bit more cultish, but because of the general audience of cinephiles who I think are more prone to have watched this than just your random person off the street, particularly due to the age of the film, where there are just too many people that anything before 1980, they just won't watch for whatever reason. Even though I would stand to say anything from the 1980s at this point is 40 some years old.
Shut up.
Not just yet. Okay.
Shut up.
1986 isn't 40 years yet.
Not for another calendar year, I suppose. But even though, I would still say that it's got some age to it, and I don't know why there's such an ageism against old classics from 1940 that are 85 years old instead. But I have a 3 on that, so I have a 7.
So I'm not that far off from either of you guys. I'm going to land at the 4.5 for the industry, just a little bit higher than Tom, right on the money with Dana. Just because I think it is on so many lists. And for what this movie is trying to accomplish, I think it's about as good as it can be. And I think it ages just beautifully, which is why director, still makes Sight and Sound lists. It still makes, 100 Passions lists. Like all these lists, it's still going to make because this is the same relevance today as it was in 1940. Now, the more difficult is the audience. Part of why I love that we do lists like the Sight and Sound is that, maybe not Sight and Sound, the AFI, is that the average person is going to be like, oh, I'm trying to find a movie. What should I go look at? And they might stumble across the AFI list and say, The Shop Around the Corner, that's kind of an interesting title. And then they might watch it. Are they going to just through osmosis find this thing, on Amazon Prime? Probably not. They will have to dig a little bit, but I do think this is a little bit of a perennial Christmas classic for people. And for those people who do want to find something on a list, I think they're going to find it in those AFI lists and things like that. So I am going to go to a 2.5 for the industry and add a 7.
So that is a 6.67 average between the three of us. Let's move to impact and significance. This is a measure of the impact and significance of the movie within the immediate 5 years after it was released. We again split this category 5 into 5 between the industry and the audience. Peterson, let's give you an opportunity as a now 6-time guest to lead the category.
Yeah, in that initial 5 years, I think industry-wise, it's tough to say with Jimmy Stewart because the 5 years, he's at war. Like, he's gone to World War II. And it's a really, this is probably the most difficult of ranking one of these that we've done just because one of the stars just goes to World War II. And Margaret Sullavan was in things, but she had already got an Oscar nomination. I think this, helped Jimmy Stewart, helped Margaret Sullavan, but didn't boost either of them in the way that something like the Philadelphia Story for Jimmy Stewart would. So I think industry-wide, I'm going to say like a 3.5. And then audience, I'm going to be lockstep at a 3.5. Obviously, people enjoyed this, but I think to me that seems right for both of them. To land at a 7 across the board here seems accurate.
See, I also agree with you that this is a particularly tough situation. It's a movie that comes like right in the middle of a pretty big Jimmy Stewart run, from You Can't Take It With You to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and then into his Oscar win for The Philadelphia Story before he takes off to war. And I would agree, there's kind of like a lost period. So you can't really say it's like promoting his career. For the most part, you could say that Margaret Sullivan's career pretty much ended about this point, where she was a leading lady. Ernst Lubitsch is like right in the middle of his sweet spot of stuff that he's doing or films that he's known for. And while this is probably his favorite and most celebrated of the primary films that he's known for, I don't know how much this is like making a difference to his career right in that exact spot. So you can't say it's really promoting anybody. It has no nominations for anything. I think there's a possibility this film just kind of came and went. And the box office numbers are really hard to gauge in 1940 as to saying like what the public appetite was for a foreign set film with one primary known lead in Jimmy Stewart at the time, who wasn't like Jimmy Stewart quite yet. So in that sense, I have it at a 2 and a 2. Oof. I have a 4.
I mean, I can't argue it necessarily. I'm a little more generous, but yeah.
I'm not far off. Industry, I went with a 2.5, simply because I think that there was some staying power with the concept and how the romantic comedy was being done that was reused within that 5-year period. I'm thinking of a few other films, and I'm drawing. I had a couple of them listed, and I can't remember off the top of my head which ones they were. So I went with a 2.5. But the public, I didn't draw a whole lot. It barely made its budget
that we know of. It's really hard to know what the rentals actually were at that point.
Yeah,
rentals.
So the theaters rented.
Oh yeah, so I thought you.
Yeah,
I thought you meant
yeah, not VHS. We're not talking about QT suggesting shop around the corner in 1945. Hey, you want a post-war like Christmas film? Here's shop around the corner.
Yeah,
he'd be more likely to suggest The Night the Reindeer Died anyway.
What is that?
Yes.
Watch the opening scene of Scrooged.
Oh yeah.
With Lee Majors.
Yes. Anyway, I'm at a 2 for the public. So I'm at a 4.5 overall.
Man, I think I'd be that high on you guys. But
all right, so that is a 5.17 average between the three of us. All right, let's turn it over to Novelty then. This is a measure of the originality of pretty much anything involving the film. Usually it has to do more with story and plot than anything else, but I think you could argue that it has some other influences, possibly technology, set, makeup and hairstyling. Any of those could be a part of that. And then the execution overall of the film. We divide those two factors between 5 points and 5 points for a total of 10. I guess I will lead this category. As far as originality, because I had already stated it's kind of like a bit Pride and Prejudice-y, I don't think that this is particularly novel. I think it has a good essence, but where I give points up on this is more in execution than originality. I think it's kind of an era. It's got that screwball nature to it. I think that was very well known for that time and place. We'd mentioned other films around it, His Girl Friday, Bringing Up Baby. Eventually, the Tracy and Hepburn films are very much in that kind of style. So I think that this kind of aids in that, and again, is kind of a romantic comedy of the era. So I don't give it a huge amount of points there. But where I think the movie is one is in its execution, from its supporting cast to its two main leads. I think they do a very good job with this. I think the editing is pretty well done. I think most of the emotional beats of the film are pretty well done. There's a good pacing, a good tone, and it feels engaging, especially past that first scene that we'd kind of mentioned. When you kind of get into the emotional heft, especially of that second scene where Kralik or Jimmy Stewart is fired, I think from that point on, I'm really invested in the film. So I have a 2 for originality. I have a 4 for execution. I have a 6.
Yeah. So, oh God, this one's also difficult because this is 1940, right in the middle.
Do you think we bring you on to do the easy ones?
But right in the middle of all these screwball comedies. And this isn't quite a screwball comedy. It's got elements of it, but it's not quite a screwball comedy. And I think I think the thing that makes the originality stand out a little bit more here is the periphery characters. I think fleshing this out with a really unique supporting cast where I think all of them have a different personality. You only get a few minutes with each of them, but you get a really rich texture of how their lives are. That, I think, gives originality. I just think there's a strain of sadness in this movie that, specifically with Matichek, that is not present in those screwball films. So I think originality to me is, on this side, going to be a 4.
I would say the most Christmassy thing about the film, other than it takes place at Christmas, is the Frank Morgan storyline over his kind of sheer loneliness, that his life is kind of falling apart, and really all he wants is for anyone to spend Christmas with him.
Yeah, and on that same accord, which I love, that moment where he asks Kralik, and Kralik's like, no, and he's like, you have plans. He's like, no, do your thing. He's like, he realizes that people have lives outside of him. And I guess the originality to me probably might vary on how much that Frank Morgan character works for you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I land on a 4 for originality. And then as far as execution goes, I think this is about as well directed as this kind of movie can be. Everything from the blocking and staging to just how economical Ernst Lubitsch tells the story. He moves it so quickly. There's very little fat here. I mean, they, at the end of the movie, once they're basically together, he's like, we're out of here. We're done. See ya. So I think execution-wise, to me, this is rated at 4 as well. So I'm going to be an 8. I'm going to be a little bit higher than you, Tom, but feels right.
Of course it does. You're very generous on these scores.
Yeah, because I don't want the shop around the corner to be like the last movie. It's got to beat Joker.
The last movie.
It's got to beat Joker.
Joker's not even the last. It might be in the bottom 5.
All right. From an execution point of view, it is lean, it is mean, it is well done, it is entertaining. I'm at a 4. I think it was shot quickly. The pace was good. There's not any of those maudlin scenes where, and this is where I lead to the second part. For originality, this is not a screwball comedy. Think of all bringing up Baby. There's so much slapstick in it. Even Philadelphia Story has a certain element of slapstick. This is highly intellectual.
It's a Wonderful Life has probably more slapstick than this does.
Yeah. And so I think it's completely original as far as that goes because there isn't the physical humor in it. It's all verbal sparring, back and forth, insults, jokes, talking about love in a philosophical tone. So I'm at a 4.5 for originality and a 4 for execution because of the quickness and the pace and how the dialogue is so emphasized in the lines. So I'm at an 8.5.
Everybody's entitled to be wrong.
That's right, Tom, and you're the lead one in that.
So that's a 7.5 average between the three of us. All right. Classicness is a measure of how well the movie has aged. This is a category we've kind of undergone some consideration or some reconsideration recently due to a previous episode that our guest was recently on for his 5th time, Up in the Air. So if you're not familiar, we had some complaints from a mutual acquaintance, let's say.
I heard.
He's more of a friend. But anyway, so I've suggested maybe moving the baseline from a 7 to a 6 on this category. Any issues with that? And I guess, how would you say, after the complaints, do you feel that we did service to Up in the Air? Was that on par, or maybe we should have moderated?
What were our classicness on Up in the Air? What do we say?
I think it was a 9 or like a 9.12 or something like that.
See, and this is what I don't think Corn's talked about, but to me, the classicness is in the genre. So when I look back and I think about movies, like Home Alone is a Christmas classic, right? It's a movie I have a deep affection for. I think it's fun. Do I think it's the greatest movie of all time? No, but it's probably like a 10 out of 10 for classicness. And that doesn't mean it's better than The Godfather. It just means for what the movie is, it's a true classic.
And that's why Home Alone is also lower on the list overall than The Godfather, but okay.
But I think a lot of this is also in the eye of the person too.
Oh, of course it is.
And that's because Corns was Mr. 10 for Fight Club. And I think the three of us I was a little more generous than you guys because I like a little bit more than y'all. But I think that's a great example of a movie where I don't think Fight Club holds up all that well, but he does. And he had some good arguments.
Sure.
I liked his arguments, but I don't know if they necessarily worked for me, but they worked for him. So I think.
Well, and apparently most of the film bros on Twitter, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Taxi Driver is a much more classic film than Fight Club is. It's basically like the more important version of Fight Club, and I think is more telling of where we're at as an atmosphere. And I just simply don't understand Fight Club to the level that Andrew is, but fine, whatever. That doesn't mean that my co-host has not argued against both films for basically the same thing.
Okay. To me, there's an element of classicness that we seem to never really understand or consider, or at least articulate, which is if you were to take this film and make it today, could you do it without modifying it much and it be well received or topical?
That's never really been of consideration for this category.
I know, but maybe it should be, because ultimately when I started thinking about it more, that's part of the consideration, but we've never really articulated it, which is you could take this film today and basically reshoot it with modern actors and update it, and it would be perfect. There would be nothing wrong with it. There's nothing in it that's offensive. There's no problems with it. It's not, there's nothing wrong with this film. Now, is it perfect as far as classicness goes? No, but I'm at an 8.5.
So we have an opening shot fired, I suppose. We have a score on the board. I'm just going to say right now, again, what kids know what letters are? They barely know what email is. Everything's by text or by chat or whatever else. It's not in complete sentences. We have modified words like you are being your.
My kids, I'll say, when they receive a physical letter in the mail, get so excited.
Okay, that to me sounds anecdotal at best. Like, how many kids receive letters? I think letter writing is a lost art.
Oh, no, that I'm not disagreeing.
And even the update or the most recent update from 1998 is extremely dated. The fact that we have the dial-up internet going on it. Oh my God. Talk about late 90s.
But you update this movie and it's Tinder or it's eHarmony. Yeah. All these different.
But Tinder, you have an idea of what the person looks like. So that's why I said it had to be like a Reddit chat board where you just randomly meet somebody that has no pictures on their profile or anything else to go by.
People did meet on Letterboxd and then got married.
That's true, but there are sometimes profile pictures of people on Letterboxd.
I guess mine's...
I mean, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you're going to bond over a movie, but I don't know. I'm not sure how to update this. I just know that even since the last version that we had, which is 26 going on 27 years ago, it's already pretty dated. So, yes, while the concept holds up, there are just things about this that I think are misplaced. And one of the reasons that I have to put it there is 2 weeks ago, we talked about how much context you would need to know that Japanese internment happened in America and people knowing the historical context of things. Multiple time guest coming up in, I think, 2 weeks, maybe 3, Sarah Shea is a history teacher in Las Vegas. And if I get those details wrong, Sarah, you can scold me yourself. Anyway, but she decided that the day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, she was going to discuss the I Have a Dream speech and figured it would be a very simple class because how does everyone not know a very canonized speech in American history? Oh, well, wouldn't you know it? None of them had heard of it. Not a single kid in the class. And
Really?
This just goes back to the nature of you can't believe everything you see on the internet, Abraham Lincoln, 1863. And how many kids would believe that that was an actual Abraham Lincoln quote? I mean, my God.
I wrote that up and posted it on my door, and then I put it on the internet. My cousin, who's a history teacher, posted it on her board because she thought it was funny, and kids were coming by going, "I didn't know Lincoln said that."
The state of American education, and it's not because of the educators. I don't know who bears more responsibility, the totality of the community output or the parents themselves, but you're failing. Anyway, the point
My daughter's
learned
the I Have a Dream speech, and she's 8.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I knew it when I was very young because my dad constantly would quote in his better moments, "I'm free at last, I'm free at last." And it usually had something to do with my mother, but that's beside the point.
But I'm also 15 miles from where MLK was born. So,
Fair.
Yeah.
But anyway, I also knew the Gettysburg Address at a very young age, or at least pieces of the Gettysburg Address. I couldn't tell you what they meant until I was much older, but still. So the historical context for a lot of this, I think, is missing. You talked about it being in the Great Depression. I don't think everybody's going to be bringing those factors into something like this, and nor is it necessarily directly mentioned at all. But a film that is technically set in Hungary with a lot of foreign-sounding names, updated today to have to do with like weird Eastern European countries that we never depict on film, having to do with currencies we've never heard of before. I just don't know how well this has aged, so I had a 5.
Okay. A lot's been said. So to me, the classicness does go back a little bit to, I think this could be updated pretty easily today. I do think, as far as aging has gone, this movie hasn't aged all that poorly. It's very little kind of dialogue there, like, that's a little cringy. There's almost none of that. There is a little bit of a tick down for me here because, it has not endured in the public in the way that I think it really should have. But I do think it's a movie that more people will discover each year, if that makes sense. Because you know what? Now that Christmas starts in July, people are going to be looking for Christmas movies for months, and this will, I think, continue to have a lifespan with that.
It's alternative Hallmark. Okay.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to be right at a 7.5 here for the classicness. That seems right. Going higher seems a little too generous, but going lower seems a little bit too harsh for me.
All right. So that puts us at a 7 average between the three of us. let's go to our final category that we get to comment on of rewatchability. I will say that I probably need one more pass through this movie before I would add it to the Tom's Favorites Plex playlist, but it's pretty...
I guess I would say that I'm probably looking at a 6.5 right now. The more often watching it again, I may increase that number. But right now, it's something I would rewatch. And in fact, I would probably like to rewatch with other people. I think your mother would, for example, enjoy this film a lot.
She didn't watch it with you?
Nope. We couldn't get our schedules to match up, so I watched it on my own in my office while I was doing paperwork.
I'm glad you could carve out time for the show.
I waited for her and didn't happen, so I just went ahead.
So I'm probably going to I'll definitely be the high one here because I've seen this a couple times, and I'm going to return to this over and over because I think it really is. It's in that sweet spot of a rewatchability for me. 99 minutes is prime rewatchability. There's 3.5 movies I love that I'd love to rewatch, but I can't get the time, right? To me, this is going to be my highest category, I think. I think I'm going to be at a 9 for rewatchability because everything about this is like a warm blanket, and then it ends, and it's just this very sweet thing. It's got the tenderness, it's got the sadness. It's a little bit of the whole spectrum of emotion.
So that is a 7.83 average between the three of us. So then we move to audience score. For this, we had an 89% for Google users and a 91% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us a 9. So to repeat the categories, we had a 6.67 for legacy. We had a 5.17 for impact and significance, a 7.5 for novelty, a 7 for classicness, a 7.83 for rewatchability, a 9 for audience score, giving us a final total of 43.17, and currently placing it on our list between The King Mutiny and Sleepless in Seattle at number 166.
And I mentioned that I would actually personally put the Sleepless in Seattle significantly higher than this.
Well, it is 1/100th of a point above that.
1/100th. That is pretty close.
Yeah.
That's as close as literally you can have without being a tie on our scoring system. So if you have any comments or didn't like our scoring, you can contact us at greatestaltimemopodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at GMOAT Podcast, GMOAT, or you can find us at RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOAT Podcast. All right, let's move to remaining questions for this one. I don't have really very many, but do the Maticheks get divorced? Mrs. Matichek is referenced in the other portion of the film. It seems like they're still together, yet in the final scene where he doesn't want to spend Christmas by himself, they may be estranged. I don't really know.
I think they definitely get divorced. And I think the biggest call there is that he's looking to be with anyone else and really, I think, create that new family that he's been neglecting in some way. The Matichek Company has been his life's work. And I think it does imply that because it has been his life's work, it has also estranged him from his wife in some way. I think he's now saying, you know what? I'm too old to try another hand at love. I'm going to really throw my hat in with my work family and my company, which I think is kind of a sweet, endearing way to end it. And that kid at the end seems like he's maybe a young Kralik.
I also think that divorce, given that time period that we're talking about, and if he's Catholic, although usually Hungary is Reform or Orthodox.
Well, it's Greek Orthodox, which is not far from it.
But I don't know what the opinions of divorce are in the Greek Orthodox compared to... Is it? Okay. I don't know if divorce will ever be actually considered, but he may be estranged.
Do you think there's a world where, because of what he's gone through and kind of opening up to love with other people, he goes back to his wife and like really gives it a true shot?
I don't know. I mean, do we know all of the circumstances of what happens with her? I mean, really thinking about it, he probably spends more time at the shop than he does at home. And so it's possible that that was already his family and he's just realizing it. And as much as he cared about his wife, she always was second, and that's why she might step out on him. And then to have the betrayal of it being somebody from his work family, I think might be too much for him. And that's why I think there's just such a chasm that may never be able to be healed.
But I think Vadesh also is implied to be one of the shorter tenured employees at 2 years.
Yeah, well, I'll also say that she certainly didn't relinquish any interest in the money.
No.
All right, the other question I had, does Mr. Matichek ever actually step back from work?
His identity is so tied up in the store and the people and everything else. The only way he takes a step back is if he's in a nursing home or dead.
Yeah, I think he'd have to have some major health concerns. Even giving a certain level of title to Kralik, I can't see it long term.
Yeah, so I think Christmas Eve is a good example for him of he can give control to Kralik, still be kind of in and around the shop, but not be as hands-on and putting as much labor involved. And I think will probably be better for his emotional and mental health. So I think he takes a little bit of a step back, but not like fully, if that makes sense.
This reminds me so much of a boss that I had for a very short period of time. And I think that's part of the reason that I have such a difficulty with the character. The person who wants your honest opinion, but then will ignore you when he hears from somebody else, and he changes his mind so constantly that it's just like, I could feel more with the Kralik character than I could with the Morgan character, but maybe that's just me. At least I don't currently have a supervisor that constantly changes their mind or is prone to flights of fancy or mood shifts all the time. Thank goodness she doesn't listen to this program.
Yeah. Well, the boss above her is pretty even keel. And he'll probably...
depends on the day.
He'll probably never actually walk away either.
That's true. Not completely.
No.
He'll have to be put out on an ice float.
Gee, thanks. Yeah.
All right. Any other remaining questions for either of you?
Nope.
One I did have was when we're watching the movie, we know that Kralik knows that it's her. And I was curious, do you think at any point she starts to suspect it's him?
No, because of the reaction at the end. I think the way it's written is that she doesn't ever... Unlike You've Got Mail, where I think she wants it to be him and has a line specifically to that point where it starts to
she says specifically, right?
Yeah. I was hoping it would be you, is her line. But in this one, it just feels kind of genuine surprise.
That's where I lean to. I know she's saying how much she wants it, like, not... I mean, she says, basically, I want it to be you, and I wish that things would have gone different for us. So I don't know if maybe even not a thought, but a wish was him. Maybe that. And then one last quick one. Did either of you notice that it was P.O. Box or mailbox, whatever it was called, 237? Which is also the room in The Shining.
I hadn't made that connection, but...
I'm assuming Stephen King did not do that on purpose, but...
I would guess not, no.
No.
And are you talking about the movie or the book? Because the movie and the book have two different room numbers.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like 241 in the book.
Oh, I had no idea. Okay. I thought it was always 237 in the book, too. Okay. So, I mean, Kubrick could have had the...
I mean, he was a film... fan.
Lover, yeah.
Yeah. So it's possible, but I don't know. That might be a little bit of a stretch.
The number 237 is always kind of etched in my mind as a Shining number.
All right. So we want to thank our guest, Peterson, for being on with us again. You will be back next week for La Dolce Vita. But before then, what are you working on and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm working on some things at Psycho Drive-In and War Starts at Midnight. We're talking about getting the old gang back together. And then you can find me at Twitter, Peterson W. Hill, Letterboxd, Peterson W. Hill, and Blue Sky at Peterson W. Hill.
All right, excellent. And before the end of the show here, remaining thoughts and such, Dad, I know we had at least one person that reached out to me that was having trouble with your Substack. So is there a good title that it is under that would be more easily able to find?
Well, let me see here.
Because I tried Dana W. Duncan. I tried Dana Duncan. I tried just Duncan, Dana.
I sent the link. It's under Dana Duncan, and it's it's just Dana Duncan at Duncan or Dana W. Duncan. But yes, the title of it is Rules of Life. I did the introduction and I did number 1. I'm going to probably write number 2 tomorrow and post it. If I get a chance to, maybe on Saturday, I'll probably post number 3.
Yeah, I still can't find you if you're just trying to do a general search.
Yeah,
So-
I searched Dana W. Duncan Substack, doesn't pop. So your Facebook page pops up, though.
I don't know. It's probably
It
why
doesn't
I'm...
pop up under posts, under publications, under topics, nothing. So I question whether you actually have one, but I will try and find out, and maybe we'll just put it out on
I
the
sent you the
socials
link.
to try and... Okay.
And I actually have had people who have looked at it. I've had 8 views on the first one, and I've had 6 views on the second one.
I think we'll have to throw that up on the socials to help people find that. So,
Yeah.
Any other remaining thoughts, though, for the week?
None. I really don't. I'm staying in a house that was designed by an assistant to Frank Lloyd Wright, so it's a prairie home. And Frank Lloyd Wright was from Spring Green, which is about 7-8 miles away. So we'll be going there tomorrow for some things or for dinner. So, yeah.
I don't really have too much either to add this week. I'm glad Severance is back. For anyone that doesn't know, it was my top show of, I think it was 2022 already. So, gosh, that's going back quite a ways. But
Was it? I thought it was 23. Came out this time 2 years ago.
I think it's 2022 because they were supposed to have it up last year, except the writer's strike delayed everything.
Yeah.
So they didn't end up filming it. And they've had a really good rollout. And I'm hoping that more people kind of join in because there is not a large subscription base for Apple TV Plus shows. Even though I think arguably Apple's quality of programming from show to show to show that they put out is arguably on par for me with HBO in level of quality.
Yeah, because I think it's Netflix poops out a show every 2 days, and it's maybe they're okay, but they're all 6 episodes too long. Apple's really good at getting well-made HBO level style things. I like Severance quite a bit. What's the space one?
Silo?
No, it is basically it's a show about if Russia landed on the moon before we did.
Oh, For All Mankind.
For All Mankind. I think that show, I don't think it quite sustains, but I know
both of us watched Shrinking. Yep. I think they're coming back with a 4th season of Ted Lasso, even though I think it's going to be drastically different because certain actors or characters are not going to be involved. So there are plenty of things on there, and I could actually suggest multiple other shows that are just good, casual, fun viewing. They actually have a fairly good sitcom lineup on there. That's not traditional sitcom with laugh track, but decent stuff that's on there that's good, that's fun, that's light. Netflix at this point in my existence is only there for stuff that I only need to casually watch, or that's turn your brain off shit like The Night Agent, which I'll probably watch, but I really don't need to invest all that much headspace in because the plots are really easy. It's lowest common denominator shit.
In the star of that, the man who played J.D. Vance?
Yes. And also was in juror number 2 as the defendant. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. I thought he was pretty good in juror number 2.
He was all right.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say that there were too many people that were good in juror number 2. But anyway.
Yeah.
I digress.
Turn your brain off with that movie.
Yes. Like Netflix. Anyway. Moving on. That'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. You are the first woman on the first day of creation. You are mother, sister, lover, friend, angel, devil, earth, home. Next week, we welcome back returning guest Peterson W. Hill of the War Starts at Midnight podcast to discuss La Dolce Vita, written and directed by Federico Fellini, with Ennio Flaneo, Tullio Pinelli, Bruno Rondi, and Pier Paolo Pasolini. Music by Nino Rota, starring Marcello Mastriani, Anita Ekberg, Anouk Ami, and Yvonne Fourneau. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRyanDuncanStudios.com or at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMOAT Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ryan Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.